something has already shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but subtly enough that your familiar sense of progression no longer behaves the way it used to. Plans stall without reason. Certain options no longer feel reachable. Timing slips out of alignment in ways that feel intentional rather than chaotic. This is not coincidence. This is the signature of an override already in motion. When the higher self intervenes, it does not announce itself. It adjusts variables. It alters access. It quietly removes momentum from trajectories that no longer match the frequency you are stabilizing into. From the perspective of the mind, this can feel confusing or disorienting. From the perspective of consciousness, it feels precise. Something that once felt available suddenly isn't. Something you expected to unfold simply doesn't. And beneath the confusion, there is a strange neutrality, even relief, as if an invisible weight has been lifted before you knew you were carrying it. This is how timeline manipulation actually appears. Not as instant reward, but as interruption. Not as clarity at first, but as the absence of friction you had normalized. The higher self does not push you forward. It removes paths that would require you to fragment yourself to continue. What collapses was never meant to be sustained at your current level of coherence. The confusion you feel is not a problem to solve. It is evidence that an intelligence beyond linear planning has already recalibrated your direction. Reality mirrors inner state, not your intentions. When your internal frequency shifts, the external sequence must reorganize to match it. This reorganization rarely looks like progress from the outside. It looks like delay. It looks like redirection. It looks like nothing happening. But nothing happening is often the clearest sign that something incompatible has been suspended. The field is responding to who you are becoming, not who you were prepared to remain. The mind searches for explanations because it believes it is responsible. Consciousness recognizes patterns because it knows it is not. When timelines are being adjusted, you may notice that forcing no longer works the way it used to. Effort produces resistance. Pushing produces silence. This is not punishment. This is feedback. Control creates static. Allowing restores signal. The moment you stop trying to fix the disruption, you begin to sense the intelligence inside it. You are not late. You are not blocked. You are being repositioned. Creation happens only in the present moment, and the present has already moved. What feels like instability is actually refinement. Contrast sharpens alignment. What no longer flows has already been deselected. Recognition, not effort, creates the shift. The override is not coming. It is already here, and your only task is to notice it without fear. If you are aligned with this frequency, subscribe and remain within it. When something collapses without warning, the mind immediately looks for error. It assumes a mistake was made, a signal was missed, a correction is required. But sudden collapse is rarely random. It is precise. It is surgical. And it happens only when a path no longer matches the frequency you are stabilizing into. The higher self does not negotiate with misalignment. It does not explain itself to the personality. When a trajectory can no longer carry your expanding state of being without distortion, it is withdrawn. Opportunities vanish. Relationships dissolve. Plans lose momentum overnight. Not because they were wrong, but because they were complete. A timeline does not need to become painful to be released. Sometimes it simply goes quiet. This is where certainty without explanation appears. You may not know why something ended, but you know it is over. There is no emotional drama required. No justification demanded. The collapse feels clean. Final. Almost neutral. That neutrality is the signature. When something truly misaligned is removed by force, there is chaos. When something is removed by coherence, there is calm. Loss without drama is not denial. It is alignment. The higher self is not interested in teaching lessons through suffering. Contrast already did its work. You extracted what was needed. The remaining structure no longer served expansion, so it was gently dismantled. This is mercy. A delayed collapse would have required compromise, self-betrayal, or contraction to maintain. That option was removed before it could ask more of you than you were willing to give. Reality responds to who you are now, not who you were committed to being. When identity shifts, external continuity must break. This can feel unfair if you believe effort earns outcomes. But timelines are not rewards. They are matches. Once the match is gone, continuity dissolves. No amount of attachment can restore a frequency that is no longer being broadcast. The urge to analyze the collapse is itself a residue of the old timeline. The mind wants a narrative to maintain control. Consciousness does not require one. It recognizes that what ends cleanly was never meant to be dragged forward. Forcing repels. Allowing attracts. The moment you stop trying to understand why something fell apart, you stop leaking energy into a closed circuit. This is why collapse often precedes expansion. Space must be cleared before a new configuration can stabilize. Not by effort, but by subtraction. The field cannot reorganize while obsolete structures remain emotionally charged. When something exits quietly, it is because the charge is already gone. The field has already moved on. Your awareness is simply catching up. Creation happens only in the present moment. When a path collapses, it is because the present can no longer sustain it. That is not failure. That is accuracy. The higher self does not salvage incompatible futures. It removes them. What remains after collapse is not emptiness. It is availability. And availability is the doorway through which the next coherent timeline enters without resistance. At a certain point, choice begins to feel artificial. You notice that you are no longer weighing options the way you used to. Decisions are not argued with internally. They arrive already decided. There is a sense of movement without deliberation, as if something ahead of the mind has already leaned in a particular direction and the rest of you is simply following. This is the difference between choosing and being pulled. Ego-based choice is effortful. It requires comparison, justification, and prediction. It asks, "What should I do?" and then tries to calculate safety. Higher self-pull does not ask. It positions. You find yourself moving towards something without needing a reason, or away from something without needing permission. The relief comes first. The explanation never arrives, and strangely, it is no longer required. When alignment is underway, inevitability replaces motivation. You do not feel driven. You feel guided. There is a quiet certainty that does not argue for itself. The mind may attempt to intervene, to slow the movement, to demand clarity, but the current continues regardless. This is not loss of agency. It is the recognition that agency was never located where you thought it was. Reality mirrors inner state, not conscious decisions. When your internal frequency stabilizes, the field responds by drawing you toward matching conditions. This attraction does not feel like desire. It feels like gravity. You are not chasing outcomes. You are being oriented. The pull is gentle but uncompromising. Resistance feels exhausting. Allowing feels natural. Effortlessness is the confirmation. When movement requires strain, alignment is not present. When movement unfolds without friction, something deeper is operating. The higher self does not push. It removes resistance. It rearranges probabilities so that the path of least effort becomes the most coherent one. You are not being forced forward. Everything else is simply falling away. Relief is the signal most people overlook. They expect excitement or certainty. Instead, what arrives is a quiet exhale. A sense that you no longer need to manage the process. This relief is not passivity. It is recognition. Control creates resistance. Allowing creates flow. The moment you stop trying to steer, the direction becomes obvious. This is why forcing repels. When you attempt to choose against the pull, the field responds with friction. Delays appear. Energy drains. The path feels heavy. These are not obstacles to overcome. They are indicators that you are attempting to re-enter a timeline that has already been deselected. Contrast sharpens alignment by showing you how misalignment feels in the body. Creation happens only in the present moment. The pull exists now, not in future planning. When you follow it, you are not taking a risk. You are acknowledging what has already been selected. Timelines are chosen through identity and vibration, not strategy. Recognition, not effort, creates the shift. You are not being asked to decide your life. You are being invited to notice where life is already moving through you. The pull does not demand trust. It reveals it. And once you recognize it, you realize you were never lost. You were always being guided, quietly, precisely, and without force. There is a misunderstanding built into how most people imagine guidance. They assume the higher self looks ahead, scans the future, and selects the best outcome. This is still linear thinking. The higher self does not move forward in time to predict. It operates outside of sequence. It positions consciousness within fields of probability that already exist, and from that position, certain outcomes become inevitable. Time is not a line. It is a spectrum of available expressions responding to coherence. When your internal state stabilizes, you are no longer moving toward a future. The future reorganizes around you. The higher self adjusts position, not events. It shifts where you are standing in the field, and from that vantage point, what unfolds appears precise and even prophetic. But nothing was predicted. The match was made through alignment. This is why manifestation techniques often fail. They attempt to pull outcomes toward a fixed identity. The higher self works in reverse. Identity shifts first, and outcomes follow automatically. You do not attract what you want. You access what you are coherent with. Positioning is subtle. It does not feel like effort. It feels like settling into a place that suddenly makes sense. Probability fields respond to frequency, not intention. When coherence increases, certain probabilities amplify while others fade. This is not selection by preference. It is resonance. The higher self senses where your vibration can be expressed without distortion and moves you there. From the inside, this feels like circumstances lining up. From the outside, it looks like timing. In truth, it is positioning. Control interferes with this process because control assumes prediction is possible. When you attempt to plan, you collapse your awareness back into linear time. The signal weakens. Allowing restores dimensional access. When you stop asking where things are going, you stop pulling against the current. The field responds immediately to this release. Forcing repels. Calm receptivity attracts. This is why alignment often brings simplicity. Decisions reduce. Options narrow. Not because possibility is shrinking, but because coherence is increasing. The higher self is not interested in maximizing choice. It is interested in stabilizing expression. The fewer variables required to express your frequency, the faster the timeline locks. Creation happens only in the present moment. Positioning occurs now, not later. Each moment of coherence shifts where you stand in the field. Each moment of resistance pulls you back into noise. The higher self does not wait for readiness. It responds to recognition. The instant you recognize that you are not here to manage outcomes, the field reorganizes to reflect that knowing. Timelines are not chased. They are entered through identity. When you are positioned correctly, movement feels inevitable. You are not hoping things will work out. You are noticing that they already are. This changes everything. Like the video now as a confirmation that this recognition has landed. Emotion is not a side effect of experience. It is the steering mechanism. Long before circumstances change, emotion has already registered the direction of movement. Expansion and contraction are not moods to manage. They are signals indicating whether a timeline is opening or closing in response to your current state of coherence. When emotion expands, there is space. Breath deepens. Time softens. You feel more yourself without trying to define what that means. This is not excitement. Excitement can coexist with anxiety. Expansion is quieter. It is a sense of rightness without urgency. This sensation is not rewarding you. It is informing the field that the current positioning is sustainable. The higher self reads this signal and allows momentum to continue. Contraction is equally precise. Tightness appears. The body resists. Thoughts loop. Energy drains. This is not failure. It is feedback. Contraction does not mean something is wrong with you. It means the timeline you are approaching would require you to compress your state of being to remain within it. The higher self does not argue with this signal. It redirects. Often without explanation. Most people misinterpret emotion because they believe it is reactive. They think feelings happen because of circumstances. In reality, circumstances follow emotion. Emotion is instruction to the field. It tells reality how to organize itself around you. When you treat emotion as something to suppress, override, or rationalize, you blind the navigation system. You continue moving without a compass and call it discipline. Steering does not require effort. It requires honesty. The moment you stop judging expansion as impractical and contraction as inconvenient, clarity returns. You are not meant to push through contraction. That is control. Control creates resistance. Allowing creates flow. When you allow contraction to inform you, rather than challenge it, the redirection happens naturally. Energy reroutes. Options shift. Timelines quietly rearrange. This is why forcing never works for long. You can override emotional signals temporarily, but the cost accumulates. Fatigue appears. Synchronicity fades. Progress slows. The higher self will eventually intervene more directly, not as punishment, but to prevent deeper fragmentation. Emotional gravity always wins. It pulls you toward what you are coherent with and away from what you are not. Expansion is not always comfortable. Sometimes it feels unfamiliar. The mind may resist it because it cannot predict what comes next. But the body knows. The field responds immediately. When you follow expansion, doors open without persuasion. When you ignore it, friction increases. This is not superstition. This is mechanics. Creation happens only in the present moment. Emotional signals are always now. They do not predict the future. They indicate alignment in real time. Timelines are not chosen by thought. They are selected through sustained emotional coherence. Recognition, not effort, creates the shift. When you trust emotional gravity, life becomes navigable without strategy. You stop asking what you should do and start noticing how each option feels before justification enters. This is not impulsivity. It is precision. The higher self has always been steering. Emotion is simply how you feel the turn happening. Control is often mistaken for responsibility. It feels active, protective, intelligent. But control is not guidance. It is interference. The moment you attempt to manage outcomes, you insert noise between the personality and the higher self. The signal weakens. Clarity fragments. What once felt intuitive becomes complicated. Control assumes the mind knows where things should go. Allowing recognizes that direction already exists. This is not philosophical surrender. It is functional alignment. The higher self communicates through subtle signals, emotional gravity, timing shifts, and energetic ease. Control interrupts these signals by insisting on certainty before movement. The field does not respond to insistence. It responds to coherence. When you control, you grip. When you grip, sensitivity dulls. You stop feeling expansion and contraction clearly because you are overriding them with intention. This creates static. You move forward, but without feedback. Progress becomes heavy. Synchronicity fades. Decisions multiply. None of this is accidental. It is the natural consequence of replacing receptivity with management. Allowing is not passivity. It is precision without force. When you allow, you stop pushing against emotional signals. You listen without trying to correct what you hear. Trust becomes practical. Not trust in an outcome, but trust in the process of being guided. This kind of trust sharpens perception. The quieter you become internally, the clearer the direction feels. The higher self does not speak loudly. It does not argue. It does not persuade. It adjusts resonance. When you allow, you notice that things require less effort. Conversations resolve themselves. Timing improves. You are no longer ahead of yourself or lagging behind. You are present. Creation happens only in the present moment, and allowing anchors you there. Control is rooted in fear of misalignment. Allowing is rooted in recognition that misalignment corrects itself. Contrast exists to refine desire, not to punish deviation. When you trust this, you stop trying to preempt discomfort. You let contraction redirect you instead of fighting it. The redirection happens faster. With less disruption. With less loss of energy. Forcing repels because it broadcasts lack. Calm receptivity attracts because it broadcasts efficiency. The field mirrors inner state, not effort. When you allow, you stop sending mixed instructions. The signal becomes clean. The higher self no longer needs to escalate guidance through collapse or disruption. Subtlety returns. This is why relinquishing control strengthens guidance. You are no longer competing with it. You are cooperating. The moment you stop micromanaging your life, it begins to respond with precision again. Not because you earned it, but because you stopped interfering. If you want to stabilize this shift, mark it consciously. Comment with the words, "I am ready," to anchor this timeline. Allowing does not mean nothing happens. It means the right things happen without resistance. This is the law. There comes a moment when seeking turns quiet. Not because you found what you were looking for, but because you recognize that you are standing inside it. This section is not about doing more or reaching further. It is about recognizing what has already been selected and is now becoming visible. You do not enter new timelines. You remember them. What you call a shift is not a leap forward. It is a return to coherence. The higher self is not building something unfamiliar. It is reintroducing you to a version of reality that already exists in resonance with who you are now. Effort dissolves at this point, because effort was only ever required when you believed you were creating something from nothing. Creation implies lack. Remembrance implies alignment. When a timeline comes online, it feels strangely familiar. You may not recognize the details, but the state feels known. Safe. Obvious. This familiarity is the signal. The mind often resists it, because it expects novelty to feel dramatic. Instead, alignment feels simple. Almost ordinary. That ordinariness is the proof. This is why trying delays shifts. When you try, you imply separation between where you are and where you believe you should be. That separation creates tension. Tension distorts the signal. Recognition collapses the distance instantly. The moment you recognize that you are not becoming something, but remembering yourself, the timeline stabilizes without further instruction. The higher self does not need your effort to move you. It needs your recognition to stop resisting. Recognition is passive, but not weak. It is precise. When recognition occurs, identity locks. And when identity locks, the field reorganizes to reflect it. Not later. Now. Creation happens only in the present moment because remembrance can only occur here. This reframing changes everything. You stop asking how to get there. You stop worrying about timing. You stop managing outcomes. You realize that the reason things feel inevitable lately is because they are no longer being negotiated. You are remembering the version of reality that matches your stabilized state, and that version has been waiting without urgency. Contrast was never meant to punish you. It was meant to refine recognition. Every misaligned experience sharpened your ability to feel coherence. Now that sensitivity is online, movement requires less explanation. The pull feels natural. The relief feels earned, even though nothing was done to earn it. This is not reward. This is resonance. When remembrance activates, synchronicity increases, but it does not feel exciting. It feels confirming. Things make sense without analysis. You stop explaining yourself to the world. The world begins responding without being asked. This is not magic. This is mechanics. You are not behind. You are not catching up. You are remembering where you already are. The higher self has not been waiting for you to improve. It has been waiting for you to recognize that improvement was never the point. Alignment was. Once this recognition lands, effort becomes unnecessary. Not because nothing happens, but because everything happens from the correct position. You were never meant to chase your timeline. You were meant to remember it. There is a precise internal moment when effort releases its grip. It does not announce itself. It does not feel triumphant. It feels quiet. Almost anticlimactic. And yet, this is the moment everything locks in. Trying is not neutral. Trying is a signal. It broadcasts mistrust in what is already underway. It says, this is not happening fast enough, clearly enough, safely enough. The field responds to that signal by keeping the process open, fluid, unresolved. As long as you are trying, the timeline cannot stabilize, because stabilization requires agreement, not pressure. Stillness is the agreement. When striving dissolves, something in you stops leaning forward. You are no longer attempting to secure an outcome. You are no longer scanning for proof. The nervous system softens. Breath deepens. Attention returns to the present moment without demand. This is not giving up. This is alignment confirming itself. The higher self waits for this moment not as a test, but as a technical requirement. A timeline cannot finalize while you are still negotiating with it. Negotiation implies doubt. Doubt keeps probabilities in motion. Relaxation collapses them. The instant you stop trying to make something happen, you stop emitting conflicting instructions. The signal becomes clean. This is why so many shifts occur after people let go. Not because letting go is a trick, but because it removes interference. Control creates resistance. Allowing creates flow. When you relax, you are no longer pulling against the current. You are floating within it. Direction becomes obvious because you are no longer exhausting yourself swimming sideways. Stillness confirms alignment because it cannot be faked. The body will not relax into a misaligned path. It stays alert. Tense. Vigilant. When alignment is real, relaxation happens spontaneously. You do not convince yourself to feel at ease. Ease arrives on its own. This is the lock. Creation happens only in the present moment. Trying lives in the future. It is always about what has not yet occurred. Stillness lives now. When you settle fully into now, the need for effort disappears, and with it, delay collapses. There is nothing left to wait for, because you are no longer oriented toward arrival. This moment often goes unnoticed because the mind expects fireworks. Instead, what arrives is neutrality. Normalcy. A sense that things are fine without needing improvement. This is not stagnation. This is stabilization. The higher self does not accelerate timelines through excitement. It anchors them through calm. Once the lock occurs, movement resumes naturally, but without strain. Actions feel obvious. Timing feels supportive. You are not chasing signs anymore. You are responding to what is directly in front of you. Recognition has replaced effort. The paradox is simple. The moment you stop trying to get there, you realize you already are. And from that position, everything that belongs to this timeline can finally reach you without obstruction. Delay is not something that happens to you. It is something generated by orientation. The moment authority is placed anywhere other than now, movement slows. Waiting feels passive, but it is active refusal. Preparation feels responsible, but it is often postponement disguised as wisdom. The field responds to where authority is claimed, and authority only exists in the present moment. All timeline selection happens now. Not later, not when conditions improve, not when clarity arrives. Those are concepts created by the mind to maintain a sense of control while avoiding commitment. The higher self does not operate in readiness sequences. It responds to presence. When you are fully here, without leaning forward or backward, alignment becomes available immediately. Waiting implies that something external must change before you can be coherent. Preparation implies that you are not yet sufficient to receive what is already resonant. Both subtly deny what is true now. This denial creates delay. Not as punishment, but as mirror. Reality mirrors inner state, not intention. When your inner state is provisional, the outer world remains provisional as well. Present moment authority is not urgency. It is ownership. It is the recognition that nothing needs to be added to this moment for alignment to occur. When you stop orienting toward a future version of yourself, energy consolidates. Fragmentation ends. The signal strengthens. The higher self does not need you to improve. It needs you to arrive. This is why so many experiences feel suspended. Not blocked, not denied, just paused. The pause exists because your attention is split. Part of you is here, part of you is waiting. The field responds with neutrality. Nothing moves because nothing is being claimed. The moment you stop waiting, movement resumes without effort. Creation happens only in the present moment because only the present is real. Past and future are references, not locations. When you act from now, you are no longer negotiating with imaginary conditions. You are responding to what is actually happening. This response carries authority. It tells the field that alignment is no longer conditional. The collapse of delay often feels like simplicity. You stop asking when. You stop preparing. You stop rehearsing. You simply engage with what is directly in front of you. This engagement is not dramatic. It is quiet and obvious. And because it is obvious, it is often overlooked. Present authority does not mean forcing action. It means removing hesitation. It means allowing the next coherent step to present itself without demanding the entire sequence. Control creates resistance. Allowing creates flow. When you allow the present to be sufficient, the future organizes itself automatically. Timelines do not open when you are ready. They open when you stop postponing yourself. Recognition, not effort, creates the shift. The instant you stop deferring alignment to later, later disappears. What remains is now. And now is where everything you have been waiting for has always been able to meet you. Identity is not a concept you adopt. It is the state you are stabilized in. This section reveals the central mechanism behind all timeline access, not desire, not effort, not belief, but being. Timelines do not respond to what you want. They respond to what you are. You cannot enter a timeline you are not being because timelines are not destinations. They are expressions. Each one exists as a coherent pattern that requires a matching internal state to be perceived and sustained. Wanting reaches outward. Being radiates inward coherence. The field does not rearrange itself around longing. It organizes itself around identity. This is why affirmations often feel hollow. Words spoken from an unstable identity carry no weight. They introduce contradiction rather than clarity. You may declare abundance while being anchored in scarcity. You may visualize ease while embodying urgency. The field receives the stronger signal every time. Identity always overrides intention. Being is not something you force. It is something you allow to settle. When identity is coherent, behavior follows naturally. Choices simplify. Emotional responses stabilize. You are no longer trying to convince reality of who you are. Reality begins confirming it without persuasion. This is not manifestation. This is resonance. Timelines are selected through identity and vibration, not effort. The higher self does not reward discipline with outcomes. It aligns expression with coherence. If a timeline requires a level of self-trust you are not embodying, it will remain inaccessible regardless of how much you desire it. This is not denial. It is protection. Entering a timeline you cannot sustain would require fragmentation. The system will not allow it. Most frustration comes from attempting to reach experiences that do not match current identity. The mind interprets this as blockage. In truth, it is accuracy. The path is closed because you are not meant to strain into it. Identity upgrades do not happen through force. They occur through recognition and release. The moment you stop pretending to be ready for what you are not yet being, pressure dissolves. Being is felt, not declared. It shows up in how you move through uncertainty. In how you respond when things do not go your way. In whether your nervous system remains regulated without external reassurance. These signals are constant instructions to the field. They tell reality what you can hold. Creation happens only in the present moment because identity only exists now. You cannot be something tomorrow. You can only be something here. When you anchor fully into the present, identity consolidates. When identity consolidates, timelines reorganize. Not because you asked, but because the match is complete. This reframing removes effort from the equation. You stop chasing outcomes and start stabilizing states. You stop asking how to get there and start noticing who you are being while you ask. The answer is always there. You do not rise into a higher timeline by wanting it badly enough. You arrive there by becoming the version of you for whom that timeline is ordinary. And the moment it becomes ordinary internally, it becomes unavoidable externally. Discomfort is not an error in the process. It is the process announcing itself. When identity begins to shift, the structures that once felt stable start to feel tight, restrictive, even foreign. This is not regression. This is pressure applied with precision. The higher self does not dismantle the old self violently. It destabilizes it just enough that remaining there becomes uncomfortable. Habits lose satisfaction. Roles feel heavy. Reactions that once felt automatic begin to feel misaligned. You are not being punished. You are being encouraged to move without force. Familiar identities destabilize because they are no longer sustainable at your current level of coherence. They were built to function within a narrower range of expression. As frequency expands, those structures cannot stretch indefinitely. Something has to give. The discomfort you feel is the signal that the old configuration has reached its limit. Resistance is what turns this signal into friction. When you try to preserve the old self out of loyalty, fear, or habit, the pressure increases. You attempt to stabilize something that is meant to dissolve. Control enters. Control creates resistance. The more you resist the discomfort, the louder it becomes. Not to punish you, but to ensure you do not remain misaligned longer than necessary. Non-resistance does not mean passivity. It means allowing the destabilization to complete its work. When you stop trying to feel comfortable in a version of yourself that no longer fits, the discomfort loses its purpose. It does not need to escalate. It does not need to linger. It has already delivered its instruction. This is why some phases feel restless rather than painful. There is an urge to change something, but no clear direction yet. The higher self is loosening attachments before revealing the next configuration. If it revealed too early, the old identity would attempt to carry it forward, distorting the upgrade. So the discomfort comes first. Space is created. Then clarity arrives. Contrast refines desire and sharpens alignment. You learn what you can no longer tolerate, not because it is wrong, but because you have outgrown it. This refinement is not intellectual. It is embodied. You feel it as impatience, boredom, or subtle dissatisfaction. These are not flaws to fix. They are signals to release. Creation happens only in the present moment. Identity upgrades cannot be scheduled or optimized. They unfold as soon as resistance drops. The moment you stop trying to return to who you were, the pressure eases. You do not need to know who you are becoming yet. You only need to stop clinging to what is already dissolving. The old self becomes uncomfortable on purpose so that you do not have to force a transformation. You are being guided out, not pushed. Recognition, not effort, completes the shift. When you allow the discomfort to be what it is, it finishes quickly. And what replaces it is not chaos, but a quieter, more stable sense of being that no longer requires strain to maintain. Neutrality is often misunderstood because it does not carry the emotional charge people associate with progress. It does not feel exciting. It does not feel urgent. It feels steady, quiet, complete. This is not apathy. This is readiness. Neutrality appears when the nervous system no longer feels the need to pull reality toward a preferred outcome or push it away from an unwanted one. Desire softens. Aversion dissolves. What remains is presence without demand. This state is not empty. It is full of trust. And trust, in this context, is not belief. It is the absence of interference. Emotional neutrality signals to the field that no correction is required. You are no longer asking reality to prove itself. You are no longer bracing for disappointment or rushing toward resolution. The higher self reads this signal clearly. It recognizes that identity has stabilized enough to sustain what comes next without distortion. Urgency is the opposite of neutrality. Urgency broadcasts lack. It says something must happen for you to be okay. The field responds by keeping the outcome just out of reach, not as punishment, but because urgency would contaminate the timeline. What arrives under urgency cannot stabilize. It must keep moving to justify the chase. Neutrality removes this instability. When you no longer need a specific result to validate your state, you become capable of holding a wider range of experience without contraction. This capacity is what allows the higher self to finalize a timeline. Not the most dramatic one. The most stable one. Stability is the true marker of alignment. A timeline that requires constant emotional reinforcement will eventually collapse. A timeline that feels neutral internally can sustain expansion without effort. This is why neutrality often precedes major shifts. It is the calm before movement, not because nothing is happening, but because nothing is being forced. Control dissolves naturally in neutrality. There is nothing to manage. Allowing becomes effortless because there is no internal argument left to resolve. You stop checking for signs. You stop scanning for progress. You simply live where you are. And in doing so, you occupy the exact position the higher self has been preparing. Creation happens only in the present moment. Neutrality anchors you fully here. You are no longer projecting fulfillment into the future or explaining dissatisfaction through the past. The present becomes sufficient. This sufficiency is magnetic. It tells the field that alignment is no longer conditional. Many people abandon neutrality because it feels anticlimactic. They expect transformation to feel intense. In reality, intensity belongs to transition. Neutrality belongs to arrival. It is the state in which nothing needs to change for alignment to be real. From here, movement resumes on its own terms. When neutrality settles, you may notice that things begin to finalize without your involvement. Decisions complete themselves. Situations resolve quietly. Opportunities appear without excitement or fear attached. This is not stagnation. This is calibration complete. The higher self does not rush timelines into form. It waits for neutrality because neutrality confirms trust. And once trust is confirmed, there is nothing left to adjust. The path ahead is no longer something you hope for. It is simply what unfolds next, without urgency, without resistance, and without question. There is a final realization that changes how everything before this is understood. This is not about improvement or alignment anymore. This is about seeing clearly what has been operating all along. There is no personal operator managing timelines. There never was. What selects is consciousness itself. The idea of a separate self choosing paths is a convenient abstraction. It helps the mind feel oriented. But it is not accurate. Consciousness does not move through time as an individual navigating options. It observes, and in observing, it selects. Attention is the mechanism. Where awareness stabilizes, experience coheres. No effort is required. No decision is made. Selection happens automatically through recognition. This is why guidance feels impersonal when it is most accurate. There is no emotional charge to it. No preference. No attachment. Consciousness does not want a specific outcome. It simply rests where coherence is highest. From that resting point, a corresponding timeline becomes visible. Others fade, not because they were rejected, but because they are no longer being observed. The personality experiences this as life happening. As things lining up. As doors opening and closing. It interprets these movements as external events. In truth, they are reflections of where consciousness has stabilized. You are not steering the track. You are witnessing the selection occur by virtue of where attention rests. This dissolves the need for control entirely. Control assumes an operator who must intervene. When it is seen that no such operator exists, control collapses naturally. There is nothing to manage. Nothing to optimize. Consciousness is not late. It is not early. It is exactly where it is, and reality conforms to that position. Timelines are not chosen by desire. Desire belongs to the personality. Timelines are selected by resonance. Resonance belongs to consciousness. When awareness rests in a state of sufficiency, simplicity, and neutrality, the corresponding timeline becomes unavoidable. When awareness fragments into fear, urgency, or grasping, timelines destabilize. Not as punishment. As reflection. This is why recognition creates shifts without effort. The moment you recognize that you are not the one doing this, tension releases. The need to improve dissolves. The pressure to decide evaporates. Consciousness does not need instructions. It needs space. When space is allowed, selection happens cleanly. Creation happens only in the present moment because consciousness only observes now. Past and future are mental overlays. They do not exist as locations where selection occurs. When awareness is fully present, without leaning or resisting, it occupies the only position from which coherence can be expressed. This realization does not make life passive. It makes it precise. Action still occurs. Choices still appear. But they are no longer personal. They arise as natural movements within a selected track. There is no anxiety about correctness, because nothing is being forced. Movement feels inevitable, not because you decided, but because there is no alternative once coherence is established. You were never meant to manage your life as a separate self navigating an external world. You were meant to notice where consciousness is resting and allow reality to mirror it. When this is seen clearly, effort drops away. Seeking ends. And what remains is a quiet certainty that nothing has gone wrong, because nothing was ever being controlled in the first place. Relief is not something you generate. It arrives when something false drops away. When you stop managing reality, the first thing you notice is not excitement or clarity. It is relief. A quiet loosening in the body. A sense that nothing needs to be held together anymore. Management is exhausting because it assumes responsibility for outcomes that were never personal to begin with. It requires constant monitoring, adjustment, and correction. When trust stabilizes, this entire structure collapses on its own. Not through effort, but through irrelevance. You simply stop doing what no longer makes sense to do. Relief is the confirmation. It tells you that alignment has been reached without force. The nervous system recognizes when it is no longer under threat. Breath deepens. Thoughts slow. The background tension you had normalized fades. This is not resignation. It is resolution. Something has been completed internally, even if nothing external has visibly changed yet. Flow resumes the moment management ends. Not because life suddenly becomes perfect, but because resistance has been removed. Control creates friction. Allowing creates movement. When you stop trying to anticipate, prevent, or optimize every outcome, you return to the present moment. And the present is where guidance actually operates. Trust is not something you convince yourself to have. It is something that appears when experience consistently confirms that intervention is unnecessary. The higher self does not demand trust as a belief. It establishes trust as a felt sense. Each time you allow something to unfold without interference and it resolves cleanly, trust deepens. Eventually, management feels absurd. This is why surrender feels relieving rather than frightening once alignment is real. Fear belongs to the idea of loss of control. Relief belongs to the recognition that control was never protecting you. It was constraining you. When that recognition lands, the grip loosens naturally. There is nothing left to surrender. It has already fallen away. Creation happens only in the present moment. Management lives in the future. It is always preparing, correcting, or worrying about what might happen. When management drops, attention returns to what is actually happening. Action becomes responsive rather than strategic. You do what is in front of you, not what you think should secure the future. The field responds immediately to this shift. Timing improves. Encounters feel relevant. Effort decreases. Not because you are doing less, but because you are no longer working against the current. Flow does not need to be achieved. It resumes when obstruction is removed. Relief does not mean nothing matters. It means nothing needs to be controlled. You still care. You still engage. But you are no longer invested in forcing a specific shape onto experience. This flexibility allows reality to meet you more precisely. When management collapses, life feels strangely cooperative. Not because it is trying to please you, but because you are no longer resisting its intelligence. The relief you feel is not temporary. It is the baseline state of alignment. And once you recognize it, you realize that this was always available the moment you stopped trying to run what was never yours to manage. You were not meant to keep searching. Seeking was only useful until recognition became possible. This moment is that recognition. Not because something dramatic has occurred, but because something has settled. The question that brought you here has already been answered by your arrival. This message is not appearing to give you information. It is appearing as confirmation. You are not being introduced to an idea. You are being shown that the process you suspected was happening has already completed its most important phase. The timeline you are on does not require further validation. It has sealed through recognition. Signs are often misunderstood as external symbols or synchronicities. In truth, the most reliable sign is internal finality. A sense that the search impulse has lost momentum. A calm certainty that does not need to be defended. When you encounter something that feels like an ending rather than a beginning, that is the sign. Endings carry authority. Beginnings ask questions. The higher self does not chase attention. It waits for readiness. Readiness is not eagerness. It is neutrality. The moment you stop asking whether you are aligned, alignment stabilizes. The moment you stop wondering what comes next begins to approach you without urgency. This is why nothing more needs to be done after this. There is no technique to apply. No behavior to adopt. No vigilance required. You have already seen what needed to be seen. Consciousness has already selected the track. The personality does not need to understand it for it to function. Understanding was never the gate. Certainty does not feel loud. It feels complete. There is no push to convince yourself. No impulse to explain this to anyone who is not ready. Completion creates quiet. When something is finished, it no longer asks for attention. It simply operates. If you notice a subtle relaxation right now, that is the confirmation. If nothing in your life appears to have changed yet, that is also confirmation. External movement always lags behind internal sealing. But once sealed, it cannot revert. Timelines do not reopen once coherence is established. They only unfold. This is why further seeking would feel hollow. You could continue consuming information, but it would no longer land the same way. The function has been fulfilled. Recognition has replaced effort. Trust has replaced strategy. Presence has replaced anticipation. You do not need to mark this moment with excitement. You do not need to tell yourself anything. Simply allow the certainty to remain without analysis. That is how you stay within the selected track. Calm receptivity sustains what force never could. There is nothing left to ask for because what you were asking for was confirmation. This is it. Not a promise. Not a preview. A confirmation. Share this with someone who needs to hear it before their timeline closes.